Millions watched as Representative Jasmine Crockett calmly laid out documents linking Justice Amy Coney Barrett to hidden financial ties, and within minutes, Barrett walked off live TV without answering a single question. You could feel the quiet tension in the room, even before a single word was spoken. The setting, a modest, clean-lit studio in Washington, D.C. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just 4 chairs, a semicircle of microphones, and a table of bottled water that no one had touched. The panel was supposed to be straightforward. A discussion on judicial ethics, hosted by Civic Roundtable Live, a weekly public affairs program that usually aired to a modest audience of policy wonks and late-night insomniacs. But that night, the stakes were different. Justice Amy Coney Barrett sat near the center, legs crossed, posture perfect, her face composed and professional. She wore a slate blue suit, modest jewelry, and a practiced smile that rarely faltered. Across from her was Representative Jasmine Crockett, sharp, present, and unreadable. She wore a dark wine-colored blouse, no visible notes, no expression except a calm readiness that felt loaded. The moderator, Clint Mason, a former legal correspondent for PBS, gave his usual polished intro. Tonight, we're joined by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Representative Jasmine Crockett, Professor Ronald Chu from UCLA, and retired Circuit Judge Marcia Bell. We'll be discussing judicial accountability, ethics in the highest court, and what transparency looks like in 2025. The first 20 minutes went by like clockwork, predictable, measured responses. Barrett spoke about the importance of public trust in the judiciary, often referencing constitutional principles and separation of powers. Jasmine chimed in sparingly, nodding politely as others took turns. At one point, Judge Bell offered a gentle critique of recent court behaviors, saying, "Public perception is everything. We can't pretend like we operate in a vacuum." Barrett smiled and replied, "Absolutely, Marcia, but we must be careful not to turn the court into a political battlefield." Everything seemed normal, too normal. What no one knew, not even the producers, was that Jasmine Crockett had walked into that studio with a plan, not an outburst, not a rant, but something far more surgical. She had 3 folded pages tucked inside her blazer, a list of donors, a timeline of rulings, a brief email thread. She wasn't just there to participate, she was there to reveal. The cameras kept rolling, no cuts, no breaks. Clint, ever the smooth facilitator, transitioned to the next topic. Let's talk financial disclosures. There's been a lot of discussion lately around whether justices should follow the same standards as members of Congress. Jasmine, where do you stand on that? She paused, tilted her head slightly, and then adjusted her mic. Her first words came out steady. "I think the American people deserve to know if rulings are being influenced by anything beyond the Constitution." Barrett's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to notice. "I also think," Jasmine continued, "that when we talk about influence, we shouldn't just focus on campaign contributions or political affiliations. We need to talk about personal networks, behind closed-door communications, recusals that didn't happen when they should have." Clint leaned in. "Are you referring to anyone in particular?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Yes, Justice Barrett." You could have heard a pin drop. Barrett didn't flinch, at least not immediately. She smiled again, thinner this time. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman." Jasmine's tone remained cool. "I'm not implying anything. I brought documentation." But things turned quickly when Jasmine adjusted her mic and looked straight at the moderator. Clint froze for a second, unsure whether to pivot or push forward. The producers in the control booth, watching through the glass wall, sat up straighter. No one had expected this. Jasmine reached into her blazer and pulled out the folded papers, 3 crisp pages, each marked with yellow highlights. She didn't wave them, she didn't grandstand, she simply laid them flat on the table in front of her. "I'd like to read from a correspondence dated March 18th, she said, her eyes scanning the panel but stopping on Barrett. This was between a legal strategist named Ellen Greaves, who works for the Liberty Jurist Network, and a staffer connected to your chambers. The strategist references an upcoming decision on the Fair Districting Act. The language used implies prior knowledge of how you intended to vote." Barrett straightened. Her fingers curled inward slightly. "I don't believe I've ever spoken to Ms. Greaves." Jasmine nodded. "I didn't say you did, but the staffer did. The email makes reference to you by name and uses the phrase, 'We're confident the justice is aligned.'" Professor Chu leaned forward, curiosity flashing across his face. Judge Bell looked stunned. Clint, now blinking rapidly, asked, "Congresswoman, have these emails been authenticated?" "They were submitted to my office last week by a whistleblower from within the Liberty Juris network. We've verified them with 2 independent cybersecurity analysts. I have signed affidavits." Barrett's jaw moved, like she was deciding whether to speak or wait. She went with the latter. Jasmine flipped to the second page. "Here's a list of undisclosed donations to a nonprofit called Constitution's Keepers. In 2022, they received a $400,000 grant from a donor who also sits on the board of a conservative lobbying group. That same year, Constitution's Keepers hosted a private event in Alexandria. Justice Barrett was the keynote speaker. No financial disclosures have been filed indicating that engagement." Barrett cut in, "That organization doesn't pay speakers. I attend because I believe in their mission, and we are not required to disclose unpaid speaking engagements." "That's fair," Jasmine said, "if that were true. But the hotel was paid for. Flights, too. I have the receipts, including the reimbursement memo submitted to the donors fund." The silence in the studio had changed. It wasn't just tension. It was calculation. People were listening now with different ears. Clint cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Let's remember, this isn't a courtroom. We're here to engage in good faith." "I am?" Jasmine interrupted, her voice still calm. "But good faith begins with honesty, and we can't talk about judicial ethics in the abstract if one of the people in this room has benefited from the very gray areas we're here to address." Barrett finally turned her full attention to Jasmine. Her voice, when she spoke, was sharp. "Congresswoman, I've dedicated my life to the law. You're taking loose associations and trying to paint them as misconduct. That's not only irresponsible, it's dangerous." Jasmine leaned forward. "You know what's dangerous? Making decisions that affect millions of Americans while hiding relationships that could sway those decisions." It was the first time Barrett visibly shifted in her chair. Not dramatically, but she moved, like something under her skin had started to itch. Chu tried to interject with a legal observation, something about judicial independence, but nobody was listening to him anymore. Jasmine continued, laying out a third sheet. "This is a call log from January 6th, 2021. 2 calls between someone in your circle and a senior member of the Liberty Juris network. The same day that group filed a brief urging the court not to interfere with state election results. The timing is worth discussing." Clint raised both hands. "All right, we're going to pause here." Barrett didn't let him finish. "I think we need to be careful not to accuse public officials without full context. These documents haven't been reviewed by any legitimate body." "They should be," Jasmine replied. But Jasmine wasn't finished, not even close. The panel wasn't a discussion anymore. It was a slow boil. One where the silence between each exchange said more than the words themselves. The cameras never stopped rolling. Neither did Jasmine. She picked up the second sheet again and held it so the panel could see the donor list. Her finger tapped one name in particular. "Jackson O. Weller," she said clearly. "He's not just a philanthropist. He's also a managing partner at Pinebridge Investments. That same firm had a case on your docket last year regarding regulatory rollbacks for environmental restrictions in southern Arizona. You voted in favor of easing restrictions, against a 5-4 dissent." Barrett inhaled, then slowly exhaled through her nose. She still hadn't raised her voice, but her eyes were narrowing now, and her hands were tightly clasped on her lap. "Are you suggesting," she said carefully, "that my legal decisions are bought?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Jasmine said. "I'm saying there are patterns, and patterns deserve daylight." Professor Chu glanced over the documents Jasmine had slid across the table. "These are thorough," he mumbled, scanning a page. "If even half of this is verifiable." "It is," Jasmine cut in. "And it's not just about a donation here or a call there. It's about the web, the proximity. We expect impartiality from the highest court in the land. What we're getting is shadow affiliations." Barrett leaned back. "Congresswoman, I can't help who donates to a nonprofit. I don't control that. You're connecting dots that don't necessarily lead to wrongdoing." Jasmine's face didn't shift. "Then you won't mind answering why Pinebridge's senior counsel was invited to a dinner you attended in San Diego 4 months before the court agreed to hear their case. A dinner closed to the public, no press, no record of attendance filed under your annual disclosure." For a split second, Barrett's eyes flicked toward Clint Mason, as if looking for a parachute. Clint swallowed hard. Justice Barrett, do you want to respond?" "I was invited to a roundtable discussion by the Federalist Alliance," she said slowly. I attend those events to hear from professionals across industries. Did you know who would be there in advance? I don't see how that's relevant, Barrett snapped. Jasmine didn't blink. It is, if that event was hosted by a group that shares donors with parties appearing before you. Transparency isn't just about what's legal, it's about what's ethical. Judge Bell, silent until now, spoke up. These are troubling questions, Amy. I know you. I've worked with you, but the country's watching, and people are losing faith. Barrett didn't respond. Instead, she reached for her water bottle. Her hand trembled ever so slightly, enough that the bottle thudded lightly against the table as she set it down. Jasmine leaned forward again. This isn't personal, but it is serious. And if no one else is going to ask the uncomfortable questions, I will. Barrett stood suddenly. Not in a dramatic way, but firm, intentional. She unclipped the small microphone from her lapel and placed it down beside her notes. I came here in good faith, she said to Clint, not to be ambushed. You're not being ambushed, Jasmine replied. You're being asked to be accountable, just like the rest of us. Barrett shook her head once, then turned and walked off set. No goodbye. No parting words. Just the sound of her heels striking the floor as she exited the stage and disappeared behind the curtain. The room was still. Chu looked stunned. Belle looked conflicted. Clint looked at the camera, then quickly away. Jasmine? She stayed seated, calm, focused. And just when it felt like the room might calm down, Jasmine said one name that changed everything. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in her chair. She simply picked up the final sheet of paper and spoke with a sharpness that cut through the thick air left behind by Barrett's exit. Gregory Vance. Judge Bell's eyes lifted instantly. Even Professor Chu looked like he'd just heard something he wasn't supposed to. Clint blinked. I'm sorry, who? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Gregory Vance is a name that hasn't come up publicly, yet. He's a retired attorney, formerly employed by the Defense Liberty Coalition, now quietly serving as a legal advisor to several dark money-funded nonprofits, including Constitution's Keepers. He's also Barrett's brother-in-law. You could hear a gasp from someone off camera. It wasn't theatrical, just real, involuntary disbelief. Chu sat up straighter. You're sure? Confirmed by 3 separate sources, Jasmine said, glancing down at her papers. Same man, same last name, married into the family 15 years ago. And here's where it matters. Vance sits on the advisory board of a nonprofit that filed an amicus brief in support of a ruling last year. That brief cited legal theory Barrett later referenced directly in her majority opinion. Belle ran a hand over her face. Oh my God. Clint shook his head slowly. That wasn't disclosed. No, Jasmine said. It wasn't. And it should have been. At the very least, it raises serious ethical concerns. And at worst, she paused. It implies influence where impartiality is expected. There was a knock on the studio door. One of the producers cracked it open and whispered something to the stage manager. Clint glanced toward them but didn't move. Whatever was happening back there could wait. This moment was too heavy. Judge Bell finally broke the silence. I've defended members of this court my entire life, she said, even when I disagreed with them. But there's a line, and we've crossed it. Chu added quietly, if a lower court judge did any of this, they'd be referred for disciplinary review. Jasmine leaned back. We hold everyone to a standard until it becomes inconvenient. That's the pattern. That's the sickness. Clint turned back to the camera, still live. For those just joining us, Justice Amy Coney Barrett has left the panel following allegations raised by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, allegations involving financial ties, non-disclosed relationships, and potential ethical violations. We're continuing this conversation with the remaining guests. Jasmine looked at the camera too, her voice now steady but personal. I want to be very clear. I'm not doing this for points, or press, or political gain. I'm doing this because the public deserves to know who's shaping the law and how. They deserve to know whether that shaping is being done honestly or with invisible hands pulling strings from behind the curtain. Belle looked down. Chu looked stunned. And Clint looked like he was slowly realizing that tonight's panel would be studied, replayed, and dissected for weeks, maybe longer. But Barrett didn't want to talk. She wanted out. Backstage, the situation wasn't much calmer. Justice Barrett had been escorted to a private hallway by her aide and 2 studio staffers. A producer offered her a private room, but she declined with a clipped, "No thank you." Her blazer was still perfectly in place, but the quiet fury in her eyes betrayed everything the cameras missed. She took her phone from her purse, turned it on, and began typing something quickly, an email or a text. No one knew. She didn't speak, not to anyone. Inside the studio, Clint Mason tried to steer the show back to safe ground. "Let's open this up to our audience questions," he offered, his voice tight but professional. No one cared. The control room phones lit up. Twitter had exploded within minutes of Barrett walking off. Short clips were already making the rounds, one from the exact moment she took off her mic, another zoomed in on Jasmine's calm stare. The hashtag Barrett walkout trended by the 5th minute. On Reddit, someone was already analyzing the emails Jasmine had shown under the banner, "SCOTUS under fire." On set, Jasmine remained seated. She hadn't moved in nearly 10 minutes, except to sip water. Bell was quiet, arms crossed tightly. Professor Chu scrolled through his phone, already getting messages from fellow academics and stunned colleagues. A producer approached Clint off mic. "Barrett's car is here. She's gone." Clint whispered back, "Let her be. We're not stopping the feed yet." Back in the hallway, Justice Barrett finally broke her silence. To her aide, she said quietly, "I should have walked out earlier. Do you want to release a statement tonight?" "No," she said, not looking up. "Let them talk. Let them scream. We'll address this when the noise dies down." But the noise wasn't dying. Outside the studio, press fans were already parked, some arriving in real time after watching the drama unfold on TV. A woman from the Arizona Tribune was live streaming her arrival at the building. "We're here just outside Channel 12 Studios, where Justice Barrett left a panel after being directly confronted on live air by Representative Jasmine Crockett. The accusations include non-disclosed relationships and potential conflicts of interest tied to recent Supreme Court rulings." Inside, a decision had to be made. Cut the show short, or keep it going. Clint looked at Jasmine. "Do you want to continue?" She nodded once. "I'm fine." He turned back to camera. "We're going to continue this conversation. It's not an easy one, but it's necessary. Let's talk about why these disclosures matter. Let's talk about trust in the judicial system." Chu finally spoke again. "I think what we've just witnessed is significant. It's not just about whether something unethical happened. It's about how easily something could have, and how impossible it is to know for sure, because we don't require transparency at the level we should." Judge Bell chimed in next, her voice low and weighted. "When people lose faith in their courts, they lose faith in the system. This isn't just about one justice. It's about what kind of country we want to be, and who we hold accountable." Jasmine remained composed, but something in her had shifted too. She no longer sounded like a politician pressing a point. She sounded like a person demanding something simple. "People are tired," she said. "Tired of being told to trust systems that have never truly been transparent. This isn't partisan. This is about principles. You can't serve the people while hiding from them." Meanwhile, the clip of Barrett walking out hit 1 million views in under 15 minutes. The footage was already spliced with previous interviews she'd done, one where she insisted the court should remain above politics, another where she said ethics reforms were unnecessary. The contrast was damning, but outside the studio, the real storm was just beginning. By morning, the headlines had multiplied like wildfire. Justice walks off as Crockett drops bombshells live on air. SCOTUS under scrutiny, Barrett confronted, leaves panel. The night everything changed for the Supreme Court. Cable networks replayed the clip every 30 minutes, each time with a different analyst explaining what it meant for democracy. Podcasts recorded emergency episodes. Former judges were dragged into live interviews. Politicians from both sides were either distancing themselves or demanding more answers. But online, that's where the real noise lived. A 4-second clip of Jasmine calmly saying, "Patterns deserve daylight," had been reposted by thousands. People were stitching it into TikToks, quoting it under photos of high-ranking officials, and adding it to threads about accountability far beyond the court. In a small apartment in Toledo, Ohio, a law student named Darnell Finn watched the footage on loop as he prepared for his ethics exam. She just sat there and said it like no one ever does, No dodging, no jargon, just, here's what's happening. That takes guts. In Santa Rosa, California, a retired public defender texted her daughter, "I never thought I'd see the day someone called a Supreme Court justice out like that on live TV." The sentiment spread fast, not just shock, but a kind of collective realization that something sacred had been disturbed. Meanwhile, reporters swarmed Barrett's office for comment. None came. Her team issued a brief statement by noon. Justice Barrett will not be commenting at this time. She remains committed to the integrity of the court and the Constitution. But silence didn't help. Congressional leaders, already deep in election cycle strategies, had no choice but to respond. Representative Lou Ramos from New Mexico said in a press gaggle, "If the documents shown are legitimate, this is more than just bad optics. It's a crisis of legitimacy." Senator Kelly Dubois, an outspoken critic of Barrett, tweeted, "The court is not above the people, and it damn sure isn't above the truth." Within 48 hours, 3 watchdog groups filed formal complaints with the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee, even though, technically, the Supreme Court isn't bound by the same code of conduct as lower courts. That detail in itself became a hot topic. News segments ran side-by-side comparisons, Congress's disclosure requirements versus the court's near-total independence. People began to ask, loudly and repeatedly, why? Back in Washington, Jasmine Crockett stayed mostly quiet. She released a single statement, short and sharp. "What I brought forward speaks for itself. If anyone believes in accountability, they shouldn't be afraid of transparency. I'm here to serve the people. That includes telling the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable." She didn't appear on talk shows, didn't gloat on social media. Instead, she went back to work, holding meetings, reviewing additional documentation that had now begun flowing into her office from anonymous sources. Whistleblowers had started to speak, quietly, carefully. Some shared messages, others offered secondhand accounts. What started as a spark was now smoke, rising from places no one thought would be touched. Meanwhile, inside the Supreme Court, the silence turned inward. Clerks were told not to speak to press. A few of Barrett's peers issued vague comments about protecting institutional integrity, but no one came to her defense by name. That absence spoke volumes. Jasmine's team fielded requests from legal experts, former law clerks, even documentary filmmakers. The clip of Barrett walking out had become more than a moment. It was now a reference point, a symbol. One morning, a school teacher in Tallahassee played the footage for her 11th grade civics class. Afterward, one student raised her hand and asked, "If judges have so much power, who checks them?" The teacher had no easy answer. But in the middle of the chaos, something bigger started to shift. For days, the headlines didn't let up. But beyond the constant commentary, something deeper had begun to crack open. Something more permanent than trending topics or viral clips. Across the country, in courtrooms, classrooms, and kitchen tables, regular people were talking about a subject once considered too far removed from everyday life. Who really holds power in America, and how they use it? Justice Barrett never addressed the specifics. She returned to the bench for a closed-door session 2 weeks later. Cameras weren't allowed. No public statement was given. And yet, every step she took was now viewed under a new lens. Every vote she cast carried more weight and more suspicion. In the months that followed, a bipartisan ethics reform bill gained traction. It wasn't sweeping, but it was real. Mandatory disclosures for all federal justices, financial relationships flagged in real time, and a clear process for recusal. For the first time in decades, Congress had enough pressure to act. But that wasn't the biggest shift. The real change came in how people viewed silence, especially from those with influence. Jasmine Crockett became a household name, but not because she sought attention. She didn't book a national speaking tour. She didn't run for higher office. She simply kept doing the work, methodically and without showmanship. In interviews, she remained measured. "I'm not trying to take anyone down," she told the Oregon Post. "I'm trying to make sure we don't look away when power crosses the line. If we let fear keep us quiet, then we're part of the problem too." High school students wrote essays about her courage. Law professors updated their curriculum. Even some conservative legal figures, quietly, acknowledged that the public's demand for transparency wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about trust. Not everyone agreed with how she did it. Some said she should have handled it behind closed doors. Others said it was political theater. But none of them could deny this. She said what millions were thinking, but didn't know how to say. That's what made the moment matter. Because it wasn't about one justice, or one ruling, or even one email. It was about how thin the line is between trust and betrayal. How quickly faith in the system can erode when sunlight never touches its corners. And somewhere in that truth, a life lesson emerged. One that rang louder than the accusations, louder than the walkout, louder than the headlines. If you're in a position of power and no one's asking you hard questions, you've already lost sight of why you're there. If you're serving the people, then hiding from them is the clearest form of dishonor. And if someone like Jasmine Crockett can sit quietly, unfold 3 sheets of paper, and shake the walls of the highest court in the land, then maybe the real power isn't behind the bench. Maybe it's in the courage to speak when it's easier not to, because silence protects the powerful. But truth protects the rest of us. If you found this story meaningful, don't scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. Let it live outside your screen. And if you want more stories like this, real moments, real stakes, real lessons, make sure you subscribe. We're not here to entertain. We're here to remember what accountability actually looks like.